Shalom, I'm Glandis, and today I will be reading 1 Samuel chapter 4 through 8 from the True of Life version. So it was that the word of Samuel went forth to all Israel. Now Israel went out against the Philistines in battle. They camped at Ebenezer, while the Philistines camped at Aphek. The Philistines drew up in battle array to meet Israel, and when the battle was fought, Israel was defeated before the Philistines, who killed 4,000 men on the battlefield. When the people came back to the camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did Adonai bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Let's fetch the ark of the covenant of Adonai from Shiloh, that he may come among us and deliver us from the hands of our enemies." So the people sent to Shiloh, and from there they carried the ark of the covenant of Adonai Zvaot, who sits above the cherubim. Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. Now when the ark of the covenant of Adonai entered the camp, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so that the ground resounded. When the Philistines heard the noise of the shout, they wondered, "What's this noise of a great shout in the camp of the Hebrews?" When they realized that the ark of Adonai had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid, for they said, "God has come into the camp." So they said, "Woe to us, for nothing like this has ever happened before. Woe to us! Who will deliver us from the hand of this mighty God? This is the God that struck down the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Be strong and conduct yourselves like men, O Philistines, or else you will become enslaved to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be like men and fight." So the Philistines did fight, and Israel was defeated. They fled every man to his tent. The slaughter was very great, as 30,000 of Israel's foot soldiers fell. Moreover, the ark of God was captured, and Eli's two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, had died. Now that same day, a man of Benjamin ran from the battlefield and came to Shiloh with his clothes torn and dust on his head. When he arrived, behold, Eli was sitting on his seat by the wayside watching, for his heart was trembling for the ark of God. When the man arrived to announce it in the town, the entire town cried out. And when Eli heard the noise of the outcry, he asked, "What's this noisy commotion?" So the man rushed and came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, and his eyes were fixed in a blind stare. Then the man said to Eli, "I am one coming from the battlefield. I escaped from the battlefield today." "What is happening, my son?" he asked. And the messenger answered and said, "Israel fled before the Philistines, and there has also been a great slaughter among the people. Also, your two sons died, Hophni and Phinehas, and the ark of God was captured." As soon as he mentioned of the ark of God, Eli fell backward from his seat beside the town gate. His neck broke and he died, for he was old and heavy. He had judged Israel 40 years. Now his daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was with child and about to deliver. When she heard the report that the ark of God was captured and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she crouched down and gave birth because she was seized with her labor pains. As she was dying, the woman attending her said to her, "Don't be afraid, for you have brought forth a son." But she did not respond or take it to heart. Then she named the child Ichabod, saying, "The glory has departed from Israel because of the capture of the ark of God, and because of her father-in-law and her husband." So she said, "The glory has departed from Israel, for the ark of God has been taken." Now the Philistines had taken the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. The Philistines took the ark of God and brought it to the temple of Dagon and placed it beside Dagon. But when the Ashdodites arose early next morning, to everyone's surprise, Dagon had fallen to his face on the ground before the ark of Adonai. So they took Dagon up and put him back in his place. But when they arose early the following morning, surprisingly, Dagon had fallen to his face on the ground before the ark of Adonai, and the head of Dagon and both palms of his hands were cut off on the threshold. Only Dagon's trunk was left on him. That is why, to this day, neither the priest of Dagon nor any who enter Dagon's house will tread on Dagon's threshold in Ashdod. Then the hand of Adonai was heavy upon Ashdodites, ravaging them and afflicting Ashdod and its vicinity with tumors. When the men of Ashdod saw what was happening, they said, "The ark of the God of Israel must not stay with us, for his hand has dealt harshly against us as well as against our god Dagon." So they sent word and gathered all the lords of the Philistines to them and asked, "What will we do with the ark of the God of Israel?" They replied, "Let the ark of the God of Israel be carried over to Gath." So they carried the ark of the God of Israel over. But it came about that after they had carried it around, that the hand of Adonai was against the city, causing very great panic, and he struck the people of the city, from the youngest to the oldest, so that tumors broke out on them. So they sent the ark of God to Ekron. But it came about, as the ark of God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, "They brought around the ark of the God of Israel to us to kill us and our people." So they sent word and gathered all the lords of the Philistines and said, "Send the ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place, so it won't kill us and our people." For a panic of death was throughout the entire city, as God's hand was very heavy there. The people who did not die were afflicted with tumors, so that the outcry of the city went up to heaven. After the ark of Adonai had been in the country of the Philistines 7 months, the Philistines summoned the priests and the diviners, saying, "What should we do with the ark of Adonai? Tell us how we should send it back to its place." So they said, "If you are going to send the ark of the God of Israel back, do not send it empty, for you must surely return it with a guilt offering. Then you will be healed, and it will be revealed to you why his hand has not been removed from you." "What guilt offering should we return to him?" they asked. So they said, 5 golden tumors and 5 golden mice, according to the number of the lords of the Philistines. For 1 plague was on each of you and on your lords. So you will make images of your tumors and images of your mice that mar the land, and you must give glory to the God of Israel. Perhaps he will lighten his hand off of you, your gods, and your land. Why harden your hearts as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts? When he afflicted them, didn't they send them away, so they left? Now therefore get a new cart ready, 2 milk cows on which there has never been a yoke. Hitch the cows to the cart, and return their calves home and away from them. Then take the ark of Adonai and place it on the cart. Also put the golden objects that you return to him as a guilt offering in a box by its side. Then send it off so it may go. Then watch. If it goes up by the way of its own territory to Beth Shemesh, then it was he who inflicted us this great harm. But if not, then we will know that it was not his hand that struck us. It just happened to us by chance." So the people did so. They took 2 milk cows and hitched them to the cart and shut up their calves at home. Then they placed the ark of Adonai on the cart together with the box, the golden mice, and the models of their tumors. So the cows took the way straight towards Beth Shemesh. They kept along the same highway, lowing as they went, and turned aside neither to the right nor the left. The lords of the Philistines followed them to the border of Beth Shemesh. Now the people of Beth Shemesh were reaping their wheat harvest in the valley. When they lifted up their eyes and saw the ark, they rejoiced to see it. The cart came to the field of Joshua of Beth Shemesh and stopped there, where there was a large stone. Then they chopped the wood of the cart and offered up the cows as a burnt offering to Adonai. The Levites took down the ark of Adonai and the box that was with it that contained the golden objects and placed them on a large stone. Then the people of Beth Shemesh offered burnt offerings and sacrifices to Adonai that day. Now when the 5 lords of the Philistines had seen it, they returned to Ekron that same day. So these are the golden tumors that the Philistines returned as a guilt offering to Adonai: 1 for Ashdod, 1 for Gaza, 1 for Ashkelon, one for Gath, one for Ekron. The golden mice also corresponded to the number of all the cities of the Philistines belonging to the 5 lords, both the fortified cities and their country villages, as far as the large stone on which they had set down the ark of Adonai. It remains to this day in the field of Joshua of Bethshemesh. Then he struck down some of the men of Bethshemesh because they had gazed into the ark of Adonai. He struck down the people, 70 out of 50,000 men. The people mourned because Adonai had struck the people a great slaughter. So the men of Bethshemesh asked, "Who is able to stand before Adonai, this holy God? To whom should it go up from us?" So they sent messengers to the inhabitants of Kiriath Jearim, saying, "The Philistines have brought back the ark of Adonai. Come down, bring it up to you." Then the men of Kiriath Jearim came and fetched up the ark of Adonai, brought it into the house of Abinadab on the hill, and consecrated Eleazar his son to guard the ark of Adonai. From the day the ark rested in Kiriath Jearim, it was a long time, 20 years, and the whole house of Israel yearned after Adonai. Then Samuel spoke to the whole house of Israel, saying, "If you are returning to Adonai with all your heart, then remove the foreign gods and the Ashtaroth from among you. Direct your hearts to Adonai and serve him only. Then he will deliver you from the hand of the Philistines." So Bnei Yisrael removed the Baalim and the Ashtaroth and served Adonai alone. Then Samuel said, "Gather all Israel to Mizpah, and I will pray to Adonai for you." So they gathered together at Mizpah, drew water, and poured it out before Adonai. They fasted on that day and said, "There, we have sinned against Adonai," when Samuel was judging Bnei Yisrael at Mizpah. Now when the Philistines heard that Bnei Yisrael had assembled at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines marched against Israel. When Bnei Yisrael heard it, they were afraid of the Philistines. So Bnei Yisrael said to Samuel, "Don't stop crying out to Adonai your God for us, so he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." Samuel took a nursing lamb and offered it as a whole burnt offering to Adonai. Then Samuel cried out to Adonai for Israel, and Adonai answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to battle against Israel. But Adonai thundered with loud thunder on that day against the Philistines and confused them, so that they were defeated before Israel. Then the men of Israel went out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them down all the way to below Bethkar. Then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shin and named it Ebenezer, saying, "Thus far Adonai has helped us." So the Philistines were subdued, and they did not invade the border of Israel any more. The hand of Adonai was against the Philistines all the days of Samuel. The towns that the Philistines had taken from Israel, from Ekron to Gath, were restored to Israel, and Israel recovered its territory from the hand of the Philistines. There was also peace between Israel and the Amorites. Now Samuel judged Israel all the days of his life. He used to go annually on a circuit to Bethel and Gilgal and Mizpah, and would judge over Israel in all those places. Then his return was to Ramah, because his home was there, and from there he would judge Israel. So he built an altar to Adonai there. Now when Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as judges over Israel. The name of his firstborn was Joel, and the name of his second was Abijah. They were judges in Beersheba. His sons, however, did not walk in his ways, but turned aside after dishonest gain. They took bribes and perverted justice. Then all the elders of Israel gathered together and came to Samuel at Ramah and said to him, "Behold, you have grown old, and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now appoint for us a king to judge us, like all the nations." But the matter was displeasing in Samuel's eyes, when they said, "Give us a king to judge us." So Samuel prayed to Adonai. Then Adonai said to Samuel, "Listen to the voice of the people and all that they say to you. For they have not rejected you, rather they have rejected me from being king over them. Like all the deeds that they have done since the day I brought them out of Egypt to this day, forsaking me and worshiping other gods, so they are doing to you also. So now listen to their voice. However, you must earnestly forewarn them and declare to them the rulings of the king who will reign over them. Now Samuel reported all the words of Adonai to the people who were asking him for a king. This will be the practice of the king that will reign over you, he said. He will draft your sons and assign them as his charioteers and horsemen, and they will run before his chariots. He will appoint them as commanders of thousands and captains of 50s, also some to plow his fields, reap his harvest, make his weapons of war, and the equipment for his chariots. Also, he will take your daughters to be perfumers, cooks, and bakers. He will seize the best of your fields, vineyards, and olive groves, and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vintage and give it to his officials and slaves. He will also take your male and female servants, your best young men, and your donkeys, and make them do his work. He will also take 1/10 of your flocks. Then you yourselves will become his slaves. When the day comes and you cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, Adonai will not answer you on that day. But the people refused to listen to Samuel, and they said, "No, but a king should be over us, so we may become like all the nations, having our king who will judge us, go out before us and fight our battles." After Samuel heard all the words of the people, he reported them back in the hearing of Adonai. Adonai said to Samuel, "Listen to their voice and appoint a king to reign for them." So Samuel said to the men of Israel, "Go, each one to his town."